Okay, well, welcome to the webinar. I'm Jason Jones, Managing Principal and Service Line Leader of Cresa's Hybrid Workforce Services, and I'm joined today by Steve Ike and Paul Springer, Senior Vice Presidents at Cresa. Again, welcome. When the healthcare crisis forced shelter-in-place and stay-at-home orders in mid-March of 2020, no one could have known that an entirely new era in how and where organizations work and collaborate began. Here's what a few CEOs have had to say along the way. On the positive side, one CEO said, "We're going to be the most forward-leaning company on remote work at our scale." That was Mark Zuckerberg, Facebook. And then another CEO said, "Remote work will change how we manage our real estate. We will quickly move to a more open seating arrangement in which digital tools will help manage seating arrangements." That was Jamie Dimon, Chairman and CEO of JP Morgan Chase, in his annual letter to shareholders as recently as April 7th of this year, just a few weeks ago. But interestingly, in the very same letter, in fact, the very next paragraph, Jamie points out serious weaknesses of the virtual world. He says, performing jobs remotely does not work as well when people don't know one another, and it virtually eliminates spontaneous learning and creativity. And finally, most professionals learn their job through an apprenticeship model. So Jamie seems to be saying, yes, remote work is changing us, but we're keeping our eye on the downsides too. And at the complete end of the negative spectrum, one CEO went so far as to say, "I don't see any positives. Not being able to get together in person, particularly internationally, is a pure negative." That was Reed Hastings, CEO of Netflix. So we've got CEO opinions on both sides of the issue. But what do you think? We thought it'd be interesting to poll all of you in the audience on a few questions related to your future with a hybrid workforce to get a sense of where everyone sits. So I'm going to launch the poll and read along and answer at your own pace as we go through this. So question number one is, after the pandemic, how often will your employees work remotely compared to before the pandemic? So that's sort of like comparing 2019, how often were they working remotely, versus, let's say, 2022, which we all hope will be after the pandemic. And then the second question is, after the pandemic, do you personally want to work remotely more often than you did before? So obviously not more often than you're working right now, perhaps, which is inordinate in the grand scheme of things, but more often than before the pandemic. And then finally, after the pandemic, do you feel that part-time work from home will be important for your organization to recruit and retain talent? So we'll leave this open just for a little bit. We've got about 75% of the votes in, and then see what everyone has to say. Okay, that's the vast majority of people who have entered their votes. So here are the results. Not surprisingly, most folks feel that their employees will work remotely more often than before the pandemic, 77%. You'll see that comports with some of the statistics. And in fact, interestingly, the exact same number of you personally would like to work remotely more often, the 100% of the time, but just more often than you did before. And then, well, that's a big number. After the pandemic, do you feel this will be important, remote work, for recruiting and retaining talent? 91% said yes. So what's interesting about this is that's very similar results to what we're seeing in surveys, multiple surveys that have come out all through the course of the pandemic and certainly recently. And anecdotally, we've heard this in our own experience. Most surveys show that anywhere from 50% up to 80% of all office-based knowledge workers, this is people who use a computer most of the day, want the flexibility to work from home and the office part-time. But this brings new challenges. And another CEO quote. Sid Sijbrandij is the CEO of GitLab, which is an open source software firm. It's never had an office since its start in 2014. It's a 100% remote company and has grown to 1,300 employees in 66 countries. When asked about the blend of working remotely and working in the office, Sid said, if you try to do hybrid, you will have an A team and a B team, those in the office and those deprived of information and career opportunities. He also warned, two ways of working is very, very hard, and companies should not do it lightly. It's okay to say back to the office or all remote, but hybrid can turn out really bad. Now I want us to pause just for a moment to really ponder what Sid said about the seemingly binary choice between either remote only or office only. Because according to Sid, hybrid can turn out really bad. But we have to remember, the new reality is that approximately 70% of all office-based workers want a part-time combination of working from home and the office. And the remaining 30% are split evenly between wanting full-time remote and full-time office, which means if your organization only offers one or the other, you'll limit yourself to attracting only 15% of the workforce. 85% of the workforce may look elsewhere. This is why we believe that organizations are going to figure out a hybrid approach, offering some combination for working at home and in the office. But what's the right blend for your organization? What are the criteria for a successful strategy to make sure you're not missing anything? And how do you ensure that you're headed down the right path? To answer these questions, you need a plan. You need a plan to blend remote and office. But the plan is going to be unique for every situation, every organization, and likely unique to each department within an organization. It could be decided that some departments will need to be in the office every day, while other departments or specific job roles may only need to be in the office 3 times a month. And because of this disparity in job roles, variety of opinions, personal aptitudes, and personal desires, and potentially so many competing interests, many organizations feel stuck, and many leaders feel paralyzed. It's hard to find consensus on the way forward. And it's just one example. The operations department may not want finance or HR or sales and marketing telling them if and when their employees are coming to the office, controlling their schedules. And because of this, many organizations are really looking for a pathway forward. So if you're contemplating a hybrid work arrangement, and these are some of the issues that you're dealing with, and you're interested in answering questions such as, well, what questions should we be asking? And is there a framework to evaluate a hybrid workforce strategy? And finally, what is the roadmap to navigate to the right blend of remote and office, maybe even so we can get past our point of indecision? Then this is the webinar for you. As I mentioned, I'm Jason Jones, and I'm joined today by my colleagues, Steve Ike and Paul Springer. I've been at Cresa for 18 years. I'm a managing principal. I was originally a real estate advisor, but now I exclusively lead 2 of our service lines, Cresa Technology Advisory Services and our Hybrid Workforce Services. Steve has over 25 years of experience providing workforce strategy expertise to companies like General Electric, Macy's, Procter & Gamble, and Kimberly-Clark, to name a few. And Paul also has over 25 years of experience working with nonprofit and for-profit organizations, integrating human resources, operations, IT, and real estate. Today we'll have a 50-minute presentation with some Q&A at the end. We'll record the webinar, as I mentioned earlier, and send a copy afterwards. Please ask questions via the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen, and make comments too. Just a thought or an opinion. As you hear something that's interesting or something you want to weigh in on, we'd love to hear from you. So we'll address it throughout the webinar, but certainly at the end, we'll try to get to the comments and questions. So today, we're going to address, number 1, context, a timeline context for where we are in the arc of the COVID-19 experience from a work perspective. Benefits and challenges of a hybrid workforce strategy, its key elements, and a roadmap to build a sustainable strategy. So first we start with context for where we are in the timeline of the COVID-19 experience. Phase 1 was the immediate phase. Employees were forced to vacate their offices and work from home. Phase 2 is the endure phase. We've been enduring, leveraging technology, modifying workflows, and working to maintain our organizational culture. And all things considered, it's gone pretty well. Phase 3 will be the sustain and compete phase. This is the post-COVID phase. Organizations will work to sustain a new way of working that leverages what they've learned about remote work while recapturing all of the benefits of a shared central office. But to get from phase 2 to phase 3, we've got to go through a transition. And that is where we are right now. Or should I say, that's where we should be right now. Forward-thinking leaders are there, taking advantage of this time to invest and prepare for a future and asking a key question, which is, how do we transition? They know that there's a danger of being caught flat-footed when the pandemic subsides and it feels safe for everyone to return to the office. That's when they will be forced to make decisions about who works where and when. And perhaps even sooner, they'll need to respond to employees who are expressing the desire to continue working from home part-time, as we saw in the polls that we just did. And a lot of those employees are wondering, what's our policy? And maybe they're wondering things like, how many days am I going to need to commute? What is that going to look like? And finally, or additionally, where should I live? Should I sign this apartment lease for where I've been living for the past year? Do I need to be prepared to move back closer to where work is? And whatever policy is that organizations come up with, they're going to need to support their workforce no matter where they are by using technology, human resource policies, and work processes. It's going to be a real challenge, and we don't want to see leaders rush to approve plans and make decisions that they're not prepared for. But before we answer, how do we transition, we must first answer, well, what exactly are we transitioning to? And why do we want to go there? What are its benefits? And finally, what are the inherent challenges? Then let's talk about how to transition. For the first three questions, the first three leadership questions, I should say, today we're going to provide a framework for thinking about the workforce and the workplace in a new light. And for the transition question, we'll describe a roadmap to help guide you. But to start, we have to ask a seminal question. And this is the question that forward-thinking organizations have already been asking themselves. And it's a question that we suggest you too ask yourself. And that question is, what is the right hybrid workforce strategy specific to us that will first be reflective of our culture and minimize expenses and the threat to business continuity while maximizing productivity, talent attraction and retention, and financial results? So it's these business drivers that inform our answer to the question of, well, what exactly are we transitioning to? We want to transition to a workforce strategy that achieves these goals. But in order to evaluate those strategies, we've got to start by understanding their benefits and challenges. So let's take a look. The benefits of a hybrid workforce strategy combine the best of remote work and the best of the shared office. At the top of the list for remote working is reduced commute and fewer interruptions. These two factors alone can increase the annual productivity of each half-time remote worker, 2.5 days per week, by 16 business days a year, which equates to $6,400 per employee. There are other potential benefits, as well as the reduced expense of real estate, employee turnover, absenteeism, and the personal costs of reduced commute, clothes, and food. There are environmental benefits, and employees consistently state that their work-life balance is better. On the other hand, the benefits of the office are time-proven and have really crystallized during the pandemic. Highlights on the screen include things that typically occur best in person, such as mentoring and serendipitous moments. Now, one benefit of both remote work and the shared office is the ability to recruit and retain talent. With 70% of employees wanting a hybrid workforce experience, which means both office and remote, most organizations will have to offer some degree of flexibility between home and office to recruit and retain the best and the brightest. Another key benefit of both remote work and the office is that together, and only together, they meet one of the innate human desires that has been ignited by the remote work experience. And it's important to recognize this. This desire is so powerful that it's shaping workforce strategy around the globe, and subsequently workplace design and ensuing real estate strategy. And that innate human desire is freedom, the freedom to choose. First, the freedom to choose when work is done. Employees want to work at any time of the day while blending in personal tasks or recreation. They no longer want to be held always to that rigid 9-to-5 industrial age concept of punching the clock. The sentiment is, measure my output, not my input, and give me the freedom to decide how I schedule my day to get work done. And the second freedom, there's a very strong desire to choose where work is done. First, there's the obvious geography of choosing among home, office, or other locations. But employees also want to choose among different environments inside of the shared office that are built for specific purposes. And examples include areas designed for focus work or teamwork, other areas for socialization, training, coffee bars, video conferencing rooms, etc. Employees want options and variety, and ultimately the freedom to choose which location they determine is best to accomplish their work. However, even with all the benefits of a hybrid workforce environment, there are still several challenges to be aware of and plan for. Separately, the challenges of remote work and the shared office have been experienced by us all. But what has not yet been experienced on a broad scale are the challenges associated with the hybrid workforce model. So we're going to highlight 3 challenging scenarios that organizations could be faced with in a post-COVID hybrid workforce environment. And the first of which is the potential for disparity between teams. So let's take Team A, for instance. Team A has a manager who embraces a hybrid workforce. She's on board with the concept of giving you the freedom to choose where and when you feel you can be the most productive. Periodically, she requires in-person meetings, but they're purposeful and well-run. She focuses on the output of your efforts, not the input of your time. Team members feel a strong spirit of freedom working for her. And then there's Team B. Team B has a manager who doubts the long-term effectiveness of a hybrid workforce. He's uncomfortable managing people he cannot see, and he requires in-office presence, although he does allow remote work 1 day of the week. When Team B looks at Team A, they feel constrained. So what's the outcome? Well, Team B may feel jealous and dispirited. And they wonder, can I switch teams? Or worse, should I leave my job? If you're the VP overseeing these teams, what do you do? Now, another potential challenge is the internal division within a hybrid team. And in this scenario, we have in-office team members who are either full-time in the office or majority office, and then we have remote team members who are either full-time remote or majority remote. Now, if the boss spends most of her time in the office, then the in-office team members have proximity to her that remote members do not. This proximity may lead to real or perceived better career opportunities, choice assignments, promotions, etc., and better access to information. This is what Sid Sibrandy was talking about. What's the upshot of this scenario? Remote team members feel undervalued and dispirited. Teamwork is reduced. And they may wonder, can I switch teams? Or worse, should I leave this organization? Again, if you're the VP or C-suite person overseeing this team, what do? How do you prevent this scenario from happening? The final challenge that we'll talk about today of a hybrid workforce regards how to accommodate multiple employee profiles. And by profiles, we mean how and when an employee chooses to work. For example, Profile number 1 are employees who choose to work 3 days in the office and 2 days at home, or perhaps 2 days in the office and 3 days at home. Profile number 2 are in the office 100% of the time, but there's a cultural acceptance that if they take an afternoon or a day to work remotely, no big deal. And profile number 3's default location is at home, but they attend periodic in-person team meetings and occasionally choose to drop in the office to work or just socialize. The challenge is, how do you accommodate all of these profiles? What are the critical requirements to support them? Now, this next slide is really key to awareness of what it takes to support a hybrid workforce. What should organizations do from the perspective of human resource policy, measuring performance, ongoing training, cultural norms, technology, cybersecurity, and developing a real estate strategy that will support each of these profiles at the same time? Should you even allow all of these profiles? Is it any surprise why many organizations and their leaders feel paralyzed on this topic? Which brings us to another poll question. And that is, what is the most pressing challenge of a hybrid workforce? So again, you'll see developing on the screen some options. I will launch the poll. All right. So again, what's the most pressing challenge for your organization of a hybrid workforce? Fairness for evaluations and promotions, like we discussed. Is it morale and culture of the organization? Human resource policies, those will have to change to address a new reality. Redesigning office space, a concern we hear often. Unexpected costs, cybersecurity, collaboration, and mentoring. So we'll give this a minute for everyone to weigh in. And with so many choices here, it's understandable it takes a little bit longer to make a decision. And of course, there's more than one, but we thought it'd be interesting to see what is the top ranked, which one clearly rises to the top. Okay, so we've got a very high percentage, about 90% of the votes are in. So I'm going to go ahead and end the polling and share results here. Okay, so we can see that number one, and it's not surprising, morale and culture of the organization. Yes, this type of change, this type of really radical change from pre-COVID, during COVID to post-COVID, absolutely, that's a big concern. We see this quite often, 47%. And collaboration would be another key area of concern, a challenge that we often see. So thank you for participating. It's really interesting and helpful for us. So what we have seen, though, it's again, these results are always so interesting, but the number one is never redesigning office space, although that's certainly important. But most of the real estate industry is really only focused on that one challenge. And clearly there are so many more challenges that need to be addressed and likely addressed first. But it's not just one challenge, you know, it's these 10 challenges, which is why Cresa's motto is think beyond space. And we do this without a bias towards landlords because we only represent occupants of space. So to create a successful strategy, though long-term, you need a framework for developing the strategy. And interestingly, the framework to develop a successful workforce strategy can be built upon the same framework used to build a successful workplace strategy. The framework consists of 4 key elements, and we call it Workplace 2.0. Now, this is the first of 2 key frameworks to help you evaluate a hybrid workforce strategy. And the first element is talent. A workplace is created to attract and retain the best and the brightest. A workplace should also foster an organization's culture and leverage technology to drive productivity. And finally, there's the physical space itself. Before the pandemic, it was only the shared central office that was utilized and designed for employee engagement, productivity, and satisfaction. But what's exciting and new is the concept of space being not only about the design and location of the shared office, but also offering the freedom to choose the best location, which drives employee engagement, productivity, and satisfaction. Workplace 2.0 is going to be different for each organization and each department, even each team and individual. There's no one right answer. But the good news is you can use the key elements of the Workplace 2.0 paradigm to navigate to the right hybrid workforce strategy for your organization. So let's take them one at a time. And to talk about talent and culture, I want to reintroduce my colleague, Paul Springer. Paul is our human resource and operations subject matter expert. As I mentioned, Paul's got over 25 years of experience integrating human resources, operations, IT, and real estate. Paul, I turn it over to you. And you're on mute. The famous words of the COVID experience.
Sorry about that. Great. Thank you, Jason.
There you are.
So before we dig into the 4 elements of the Workplace 2.0 framework, we thought it would be interesting to conduct one last poll to get a feel for where everyone is with their own planning and decision-making regarding workforce strategy. So Jason, if you could launch the poll.
All right.
You'll see there's 2 questions here. Has your organization determined its future workforce strategy? And what kind of workforce strategy will your organization employ?
And I'll keep an eye on it, Paul, how far along we are, because I know you can't see the as the votes come in.
Great.
And we're about 70%, so we're getting close. These are also, again, especially question number 2 is, it might require a little bit more thought on exactly where you feel you are, or if you're not sure, obviously that's an easy way to answer that as well. Okay, we are 90% of the votes are in, so I'm going to stop the polling and we will share results. And what we're seeing right now is very interesting. So for the question number 1, has your organization determined its future workforce strategy? 53% have not yet made any decisions, but they have started planning. So that's good. About 24%, it's evenly split between those who have a plan, just need to implement it, and those who have not yet started planning. And then for what kind of strategy, not really a clear winner here, but it looks like remote first is edging the others out with 26%. And interestingly, 0 is a fully office strategy. So I find that interesting. And about a fifth, 21% are not sure. So very interesting, pretty much evenly split, but 0 on the full office and almost 0, 5% on the fully remote. So definitely heavy on either the hybrid or no blanket strategy or not sure. So I'll stop sharing results.
And I will say the poll results are very similar to the metrics that we're seeing in the research and in the studies, which is not a surprise. So back to the Workforce 2.0 framework for evaluating a hybrid workforce strategy. Although many organizations went to 100% remote during COVID-19, that doesn't mean that all roles moving forward are suitable for full-time work from home. Many roles, as we've seen, can be done remote, but the better question is, should they be done remote? In order to achieve the highest productivity, you need to determine if a role has dependencies or requires in-person collaboration and resources in the office. Additionally, even if roles are suitable for remote work, the job processes need to have clear alignment with a hybrid workforce strategy, which is somewhat different than what the strategies looked like previously. This could mean automation of paper-based processes and digitizing files, reviewing systems, or understanding how to best collaborate. That leads to training for managers and employees. Managers may benefit from training to better manage a team that at any given time includes some people at home and some people in the office at the same time. In addition, the technology that enables remote work is constantly changing, and many employees don't know how to use the full suite of technology available to them. Lastly, a key component to a structured hybrid workforce strategy is ensuring transparent and equitable criteria and eligibility guidelines for which positions can go hybrid and what the various options look like. If we go to the next slide.
Right there.
Culture is the second key element, with trust being the first important component. Organizations must build trust both up and down the chain of command. Most important is to be consistent and follow through. People are trusted when they consistently demonstrate that they do what they say they're going to do. But it's hard to trust someone who may not trust you. Therefore, leaders have to take the initiative and trust their employees. Communication. Good communication, both formal and informal, is critical to keep employees motivated. And in hybrid environments, it needs to be high quality and high frequency. In addition, leaders must find ways to communicate big picture mission and goals so that remote employees feel informed and empowered to make independent, unsupervised decisions. Now on to cultural norms. Part of any culture is establishing group norms, whether spoken or unspoken. A best practice is for teams to discuss and agree upon a short list of norms that guide team behavior and build comfort. Examples include setting certain days of the week as no camera days, setting a default time frame for meetings that is short, say 15 minutes, commit to not using the chat feature during video meetings to avoid distractions, and to commit to turning on everyone's individual camera during in-person meetings so that team members who are working remotely do not feel marginalized. And that speaks to values and job security. Because they're out of sight, employees who work remotely all or most of the time need to feel like valued members of the team who are secure in their jobs and not at a disadvantage, with coworkers who spend more time at the office. And finally, socialization. Efforts to maintain relational bonds are even more important in a hybrid environment. On the left are a few ideas to build and maintain relationships among hybrid team members that can easily be done remotely. And speaking of talent and culture, there are some key statistics that all organization leaders should be aware of as they create their strategy. For instance, as it relates to flexibility offered by businesses, nearly 70% of the employers will implement a more flexible work from home policy, which is very much aligned with what we saw earlier in the polls. About 80% are limiting on-site workers and customers. 1 in 3 full-time workers want a full remote schedule, and 2/3 of employers will strongly encourage the vaccination. And interestingly, some employees have said they do not want to come in unless other staff members are vaccinated. Childcare has also emerged as a key driver. 1/3 of employers that already have a set return to office date have a childcare plan as well. And 70% plan to create a worksite childcare plan who do not have one. Additionally, mental health has been an area of concern during the entire pandemic. However, is having a profound impact on the workplace. 65% of employees say they lost at least 10 hours a week of productivity due to mental health. Now think about that. That's at least 25% of their time that's been lost to mental health on any given week. Not surprisingly, the younger generations were highly impacted. Generation Z and millennials experienced the highest levels of stress, anxiety, and depression, and those numbers were somewhere in the 80% range, which is a pretty astronomical number. But lastly, on a positive note, the majority of employers will become more focused, more people focused, and prioritize mental health and the importance of emotional intelligence. So moving in the right direction. For the technology element, I want to introduce and reintroduce my colleague, Steve Ike. As mentioned earlier, Steve has over 25 years of experience providing workforce strategy consulting to companies like General Electric, Macy's, Procter & Gamble, and Kimberly-Clark, just to name a few. Steve, I hand it over to you.
Paul, thank you so much. As we look at technology, it's really more than platforms or tools. It's really a resource enabler that can be leveraged to create that on-demand work experience. As we look at how, where, and how often people work remotely, in the office, or a combination, communications and collaboration platforms are really the foundation for that purposeful interaction. Through real-time synchronous and near real-time asynchronous communications, platforms can be used for that anytime, anywhere, one number reach across multiple devices that can be combined with a shared workspace to meet, collaborate, and share work. With performance management, we focus on kind of three key business and human factors, looking at building trust, empowering employees, and driving productivity. And then this helps address that if I can't see, I can't manage, changing it to if I can measure, I can manage. And it makes that shift that Jason spoke about from measuring tasks and activities to driving outcomes. So performance management is a process and a set of tools that organizations use to measure and evaluate both corporate performance and employee performance. And even more, helps those managers and employees have meaningful conversations, providing real-time access to information in that visual dashboard. And what we're seeing is this helps address the issues faced with the in-office versus remote teams, providing consistent and measurable productivity, progress towards goals, and driving that business outcome, and getting everybody on the same page for that. And earlier, Paul mentioned this move from analog to digital and document management, that online storage and library using tools like Dropbox or Google Drive and SharePoint, combined with a management tool and web interface. This can be used to manage content, address security, who's the owner, what version, and that internal corporate distribution of work items and files. And it facilitates real-time and anytime access, addressing process, workflows, and document control for work items like a loan process for a bank or financial institution, a claims management process for insurance, or even think about it with client matter and case files in law firms. When you used to have all this paper sitting in file cabinets, now we're really working in a distributed environment. I need to be able to do that digitally. So back to looking at process, workflows, and document control, this digital world provides the tools that make it easy. As we move to cybersecurity and compliance, they're even more important today as they are most often overlooked and underanalyzed areas for remote work. Most people at home are on one or more connected devices. And by doing this, it provides the chance for others to gain access to critical and secure information. In my house, I counted one day, there are over 21 devices connected to my wireless network. So I need to think about those devices and logically segment those and segment the work information from non-work activities, items, and devices. So we look at the technical issues of my wireless network, the security, the private connectivity between my remote work environment and my office, but just as important is intrusion detection. With all of these connected devices in my house and gaming systems and kids that are doing schoolwork and partners in the house that are doing their work, how do we create the segmentation for that? But there's human factors as well. Dealing with compliance, dealing with human work factors, and dealing with areas that address healthcare, credit card information, financial information, or personally identifiable information. I need to have logical and physical areas that address as well as the human factors. But think about your work environment. You know, Jason is in an office at home, I'm in an office at home that has a locked door, but what about areas where I may be in a more open home environment where my office space is the same as my workspace? How do we deal with securing the information on the laptop? How do we have plans to put into place best practices for ears that can hear and eyes that can see what's going on? We really want to put in place logical and physical structures so that we protect the information and separate work environments from home environments logically. So Jason, thanks for giving me a few minutes to talk about leveraging technology to address business issues.
Thank you very much, Steve. So finally, there's the physical space itself. And to accommodate employees' desire for freedom of choice in where and when they work, organizations must view the workplace no longer as a single shared location, but instead accommodate a network of flexible, convenient, and on-demand places. Employees want the option to choose a workplace location where they feel they'll be the most productive for that day, or even just part of the day, which means freedom of movement will be important, whether between workplaces or even inside of the workplace. But at the same time, in order to really make this effective, leaders must be purposeful about their frequency and method of collaboration. This is about the team leader who regularly schedules in-office time for the purpose of collaboration, mentoring, relationship building, and serendipitous moments, but also makes use of digital tools for collaboration to facilitate higher productivity and promote work-life balance, again, digitally, virtually. So when meetings do happen, whether in person or online, they're organized, prepared, and well-run. And technology, of course, plays a key role. The new paradigm leverages mobile technology that's available anytime, anywhere, and on any device. So that's the 4 key elements, but we have a bonus key element, and that is policy. We felt that a clear corporate policy is so important to the success of a hybrid workforce that we included it as the 5th element. A clear policy is crucial to setting expectations. And as a leader, if you don't set expectations, your employees will set their own and they'll likely be different from yours. So a hybrid workforce policy should address eligibility requirements, tools and resources the company will provide for home use, what the employee is expected to provide, and expectations for personal performance and participation, and finally, what constitutes disqualification. So now that you've heard about the key elements of the Workplace 2.0 paradigm, you may be asking, okay, but what's the process for getting there? Where is the best place to start? So we want to introduce you to our 2nd key framework of the webinar for developing a hybrid workforce strategy. We believe the 2 most important things for any organization to be successful are leadership and culture. It all starts with these 2 characteristics, and it all starts at the top. They are the umbrella which overhangs all success. Then, the fundamental business goals of operational productivity, recruiting and retaining talent, and maximizing financial results should inform all decisions and drive behavior. But to achieve these business goals and support them effectively, you must follow a sequential path, starting with workforce strategy, then workplace strategy and design, and then real estate strategy. Too often, companies skip the human component of the workforce strategy and go straight to step 2 or step 3. But at Cresa, we focus on the holistic picture, starting with the human component of the workforce. Real estate strategy is just one of the elements that supports the fundamental business goals. So here it is again. Step 1 drives step 2, which leads naturally to step 3. Be sequential to be successful. And when workforce strategy is addressed first, it gives you the freedom to design your workplace with the confidence that you're basing the design and the real estate strategy on meaningful information, but also that your real estate strategy won't have to adapt to an ever-changing workforce strategy at some point down the road. You want to build your workplace design and real estate strategy on solid rock, not shifting sand. So knowing this, it's important to begin by examining the critical requirements of a hybrid workforce strategy. Being mindful that you're now going to be supporting workers who are at home one day and in the office another day, or even within the same day. And we believe this is a key differentiator for our firm, for Cresa. Now, this is one of the money slides, one of the most important of the webinar. We don't know of anyone else who starts their real estate strategy by evaluating these critical requirements of a workforce strategy. And this is the checklist that every organization should work through. We'll send an email with this list to all attendees, so no need to jot down every bullet point right now. But if you'd like to have a conversation about a specific situation, please contact Steve, Paul, or myself, or the Cresa advisor who invited you to the webinar. We love to have these dialogues, and we enjoy sharing what we're seeing out in the market. Now, the final question, the one from the very beginning of the webinar is, well, how do we transition? How do we evaluate all of those critical requirements to develop a successful and sustainable hybrid workforce strategy? And Cresa has developed a roadmap. It consists of 5 steps to methodically walk you through that process, which it begins with awareness. You're really doing that today, becoming aware of the process and benefits and challenges. But then the next 3 steps we've combined into a workshop that's built on 3 phases. Phase 1 is the discovery phase that begins with a kickoff meeting. You build your team, establish goals for the project, for the workshop, and then we conduct surveys and interviews to evaluate your organization in light of those critical requirements. Phase 2 is analysis. Here, any gaps in your critical requirements are identified, and we determine solutions to meet those goals. And then phase 3 is a delivery of an executive summary with recommendations to fill any of those gaps in your critical requirements. The workshop takes about 4 weeks, and really one of the major benefits is it allows leadership teams to go through a structured, methodical process, have conversations, hear different voices, and create consensus about the path forward, which ultimately enables clear and consistent communication to employees. And now you have the freedom to move forward in confidence that you're designing your workplace and real estate strategy on solid rock, not shifting sand. And the final step is implementation. We do have a more in-depth blueprint plan for implementation, which is included a follow-ups at 60, 90, and 120 days. And that really becomes the playbook for long-term strategies. So with that, let me offer a summary and we'll get to some questions. Number 1, the desire for freedom is changing where and when we work. As important as a shared central office is, this desire for freedom of choice demands that most organizations develop a hybrid workforce strategy. And to get there, transition is key. We're currently enduring the COVID-19 experience, but just over the horizon is unimpeded access to your shared office, and how you transition to that new hybrid work environment will determine how sustainable and competitive you will be. And then finally, be sequential to be successful. Remember that it only makes sense to develop your workplace design and real estate strategy after you've evaluated the human component of your workforce strategy and all the critical requirements that make it successful. Give yourself meaningful information to inform your decision-making, and again, build your strategies on solid rock, not shifting sand. So that leaves us with, it looks like 8 minutes of time. I'm going to go ahead and put up our names on the screen just so you can see our contact information if you would like it. And now we can address some questions that you might have or comments that have come in via Q&A over the course of the webinar. I'm going to stop share just for a moment. And it looks like actually one of the first questions that we've got is, I'm going to address this to Paul. Paul, how do we create, because I think this is right up your alley with human resource policies, but how do we create a hybrid workforce policy that meets the needs of both employees and the company?
So Jason, that's a question we actually get a lot. a key component of a successful hybrid workforce policy is feedback from both employees and leadership. So this could be through surveys, interviews, direct feedback from employees and managers. In addition, it's important to understand the job role requirements and ensure the policy is transparent and equitable, like I was talking about before, and that the eligibility guidelines are applied consistently.
Gotcha. Okay. Another question that's come in, and Steve, I'll address this to you, is who is typically included in the workshop that you offer?
Great question. And we like to go as high as possible in the line of business with operations, finance, human resources, and technology. And those are the four areas that really understand and drive the day-in-the-life business and are critical for that.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you. And here's another question. Paul, I'll address this to you as well. How do you maintain a positive culture with employees working at home while some are at the office? And we hear this quite a bit where, there's certain employees that they have to be either at the office or on the job site, and there's some tension, there's some friction. I'm just sort of adding this question. How do you address and create a positive culture in light of that friction?
Yeah, sure. So we covered some of that in the webinar, but as mentioned, positive culture starts with factors like leadership, clear business goals. It's aligned with these other things like employee engagement, transparent and frequent communications from leadership and managers. But the things that we talked about a bit, but not as much, is real-time ways to provide performance feedback and recognition, seamless collaboration between employees and their manager, and all these different components. It's really important to use technology. And when you use different collaboration, communication, and performance technology platforms, it makes this work a whole lot better when you're in a hybrid or a remote situation.
Gotcha. Okay, good. Well, a couple more questions have come in as we've been talking. I'm going to just read this next one. We're looking to socialize our hybrid plan, and employees are laser focused on what does this mean, understandably. And actually, the questioner wrote that, and I agree. That's understandable. Like I mentioned, do I sign this apartment lease or not? What is my commute going to look like? So is there any advice to shift on focusing what this means, not just about them, but what it means for the team, for their work, for collaboration, for the larger business? Any thoughts that either of you have on that, and then I can jump in as well.
I'll jump in first, Steve. So, I've been using the same words as I've been presenting and as I've been talking, but it is important to be transparent. It's important to, when socializing it, to ensure that you're using several different mediums to ensure that people have the ability to access the information. Some people may read emails, some people want to go to town halls, some people want to access it real time when they can on a SharePoint page. So when socializing it, it's really important to focus on those key areas, be transparent, and do it in such a way that as many people as possible can access the information.
Yeah. Steve, any thoughts?
I think the transparency is key, but also listening and taking advantage of surveys and communicating back from the leadership. Yeah. And then what we did in a previous engagement was actually we built not only a mid-level manager, but a day-in-the-life worker team to be that, I called it the kitchen cabinet. It's the folk that the leadership team could interact with and get direct feedback and communicate directly with, so then it would spread out at multiple layers within the organization. So really, communicating, getting feedback, and surveys for that.
Yeah, and I'll just jump in too. I totally agree. And it is sort of fundamental, right? Is communication is so important. It is about leadership. I was in the Navy for 8 years, flying jets off aircraft carriers. And one of the things that helped provide a bond for people, at least in that environment, is feeling like you're part of something larger than yourself. And you get that through communication of what is the mission? What is the big picture? When employees sort of at the ground level, and I was a trooper, I was out sort of tip of the spear, I wasn't the admiral in the admiral's stateroom, but when I understood the bigger picture mission and the bigger picture sort of values that I was a part of, that made me more committed
Right.
to more than just myself. So this is a matter of leadership and communication and values and mission would be my counsel there.
Yeah. And really being involved and respecting the individual, no matter what your role is, that you're part of that organism, an ecosystem. It's that employee engagement that Paul mentioned earlier.
Yeah. Okay, so let me get quick to a couple more questions because we're almost out of time. Another one came in. My team only hired locally pre-COVID, but we've been hiring nationally over the last year, right, outside the local area. And it feels like we really have no choice now but continue a full remote work strategy, as we can't force all these new employees to uproot, this person doesn't say this, but move to where the office is. But we would like for there to be some in-office component. Thoughts on how to handle this? And I have an idea, if nobody else. I think that you're right. You have hired people who have value to the organization, and I don't know if it's working or not. My guess is that things are working, otherwise you wouldn't have continued to hire nationally. But what you can do is you can either establish a foothold in some of the cities near. Maybe there's areas where multiple employees were hired. Hopefully it's not a complete scattergun across the United States. But I think that that's one thing that you can do is you can have co-working spaces, very small, where people can come in periodically. But you can also make sure that you're scheduling some type of social opportunity. And that's not the office solution, like you mentioned, an in-office component. But for those people who are away from headquarters, providing them an opportunity to get together in person is very important for establishing trust and relational bonds. So.
And I actually met last week with the former manager of an organization that handled all of the annual team meetings and the group gatherings. And as a medical device company, they were not going to do it nationally anymore, but they were still going to do it together. But they found ways to collect people together in collaborative work environments and doing regional. So each region would have their own gathering quarterly. And getting people together quarterly.
Yeah.
And Jason, that last question, I know that we're right at 3 o'clock, but there was a question that came up with voice recognitions with apps like Siri and Alexa. I actually unplugged mine during critical business hours, and there are security settings that you can set it up. But one of the best areas is turn it off. In your work office, unless you're actively using it for that. But with that, there are procedures and policies that can be put in place with both Siri and Alexa and others to set your security session on it only answers when called and it's not monitoring. So that's something to look into on your devices and your browsers to go in and check your security settings of what information is being gathered.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's a really interesting question and very important. There's tools, there's ways to set security protocols there, but also you may, depending on how important that maybe personally identifiable information, et cetera, is, you may require someone working from home to be able to be behind a closed door. And if they have an app or a tool like that, like an Echo, they need to turn it off, and it's in that room.
But
and Jason, with that, I would really encourage a security audit of hiring a team professional that can go in and ask those questions and dig into areas that you may not have thought about. And looking at any of that PII, how is it protected, and how are you establishing your PC with your browser and the tools, your cell phone with Google Voice or Siri. There are security settings that can be put in place, as well as VPNs on those devices.
Got it.
But the other perspective on that real quick is that I know that Amazon actually uses that technology for conference room reservation and other similar reservations, desk reservations and such. So if the right securities are in place, it can work well. Obviously, Amazon knows how to do it. It's their technology, but there's always two sides to every answer.
Yeah. Well, we've really enjoyed the opportunity to answer some of these questions and share some content with you all live. If you do have additional questions, and I'm sure that they're out there, please feel free to send us an email or contact us for a phone call. We have these conversations openly all the time, and there's no obviously commitments for any engagements, et cetera. We're happy to help out and provide you some bounce some ideas off of each other. So thank you again, and look for our follow-up with the recording of the webinar and the slides as well. Have a great day.